What if I told you there's a game out there right now that lets you ride a dragon, pilot a mech suit, grapple up a cliff, cook a meal, run a bounty hunt, catch a fish, and then walk directly into one of the most chaotic boss fights you've ever seen, all without a single loading screen? You'd probably say, okay, that sounds like too much, that sounds like a mess. And you might be right. But here's the thing, what if the mess is the point? Crimson Desert launched on March 19, 2026. It sold 2 million copies in the first 24 hours, 3 million in its first week, 5 million within its first month, and the critics gave it a 78. Not a 95, not the generation-defining moment some people were expecting after years of hype, a 78, which in gaming terms sits somewhere between genuinely impressive and we're not totally sure what we just played. And honestly, that confusion makes complete sense, because Crimson Desert is one of the hardest games to categorize that I've encountered in a long time. It's not trying to be the best RPG, it's not trying to be the best action game, it's not trying to be the best open world experience. It's trying to be all those things simultaneously, in the same world, with the same character, at the same time. And the result is a game that is breathtaking in some moments and genuinely frustrating in others, sometimes within the same hour. What I want to do today is actually understand what Crimson Desert is trying to be. Not just review it, not just score it, understand the design philosophy underneath all of it. Why certain choices were made, what they produce when they work, and what happens when they don't. Because I think there's something here that deserves more than a number. Let's start with the thing that connects everything in this game, how you move through the world. In most open world games, traversal is the in-between. It's the thing you do to get to the thing. You ride a horse, you fast travel, you jog across a field. The movement exists to connect the content. It's never really the content itself. Crimson Desert made a different choice, and it's a choice that reshapes everything else. You have a horse for covering long distances, that's normal. You've had horses in games before, but you also have a climbing system that lets you go vertical on almost any surface and it doesn't feel scripted. It feels like momentum, like you are physically pulling yourself upward. Then you have a glider which gives you controlled descent and genuine directional choice, not just a softer fall. And then you have a grappling hook which adds a vertical dimension to exploration that makes even familiar terrain feel full of new options. And then things get strange. There are hot air balloons for traversal, there are mech suits, and there are dragons, not just dragons you fight as bosses, dragons you ride. Now here's why this matters, and I want you to hold this idea for the rest of the video because it's the key to understanding everything. None of these traversal tools are separate from the combat or exploration. They are the same tools used differently depending on the situation. The grappling hook you use to scale a ruin is the same when you use mid-fight to close distance on an enemy or pull them toward you. The glider you use to descend from a sky island is the same one that lets you escape a collapsing structure. The horse you cross plains on is the same one you can fight from. This is not how most games works. In most games, traversal mechanics and combat mechanics live in separate mental boxes. They have different buttons, different contexts, different rules. Here, they are in the same box, the same verb applied to different situations. And that creates something rare. A game where there is no in-between, no dead time, no getting to the thing. Because the getting there is also the thing. When I first understood that, the whole game clicked into place for me. And everything we're about to talk about flows from exactly this idea. Most games, when you hit an enemy, something happens. An animation plays, numbers pop up, the enemy staggers in a pre-programmed direction. And that's fine, that's how it works in most action RPGs you've played. There's a visual language, and after a few hours you learn to read it. Crimson Desert throws that choreography out. The combat is built on a physics engine. What that means in practice is that when you swing a heavy axe at a lighter enemy, they don't flinch in a predetermined direction. They go wherever the momentum takes them. The weight of the weapon matters, the angle of your swing matters. A heavily overhead strike and a horizontal slash interact with the world differently. Not because the designers wrote a specific animation for each, but because the physics system calculates the impact in real time every time. And that same physics logic extends to everything around you. Slam an enemy near a wall and they can actually crash into it. Fight near a cliff edge and the knockback isn't a visual effect. If it's raining, the ground behaves differently, and some of the skills interact with it differently as well. Then there are grab mechanics. You can physically pick up a smaller enemy mid-combat and throw them into a larger one. You can use them against environmental hazards. And this isn't a special move you unlock after 20 hours. It's available from beginning because it's not a power, it's just physics. I want to be honest though, because the combat is not universally satisfying. The controls are genuinely awkward to learn. Early gameplay has people confused and struggling. And that learning curve doesn't fully disappear. The parry timing is strict, the dodge window requires patience most players won't initially have. And some critics pointed out that once you find one or two reliable attack chains, it's easy to never engage with the real depth of what the system offers. So there's a gap between what this combat can be and what most players will experience. When it clicks, when you chain a 3-weapon combo, land a clean grapple throw and watch an enemy tumble off a ledge because of actual physics, it is genuinely unlike anything else. Not because it looks cool, because it feels real. That distinction sounds small, it isn't. Every open world game for the last decade has called their world alive. Every single one. It's practically a legal requirement at this point. The world reacts to you, NPCs have schedules, the environment breathes. And most of the time that means NPCs walk in circles and the weather changes every 20 minutes. Crimson Desert's world, Pival, does something genuinely different. And I think it comes down to one specific design intention. The world was built to be noticed organically rather than instructed efficiently. Most open world games point at everything: map icons, quest markers, waypoints, little glowing trails. The game is always telling you where to look, what to do next, how far away the interesting thing is. The world is essentially a UI, an organized menu of activities presented in 3D space. Pival doesn't do that, not primarily. Structures appear in the distance and invite curiosity without demanding it. Weather doesn't just change the lighting, it changes the behavior of the world. Day-night cycles aren't cosmetic. NPCs follow schedules that exist whether you're watching or not. Faction conflicts happen in the world because the factions have interests, not because the game decided it was time for an event. And it's massive. Estimates put the map at roughly twice the size of Skyrim and larger than Red Dead Redemption 2. That's a number that sounds ridiculous until you're flying a dragon across it and realizing you've been traveling for 10 minutes and there's still no horizon. Even with a flying mount, crossing the full map takes some time. And none of it has a loading screen. You go from icy mountain peaks to scorching deserts to floating sky islands without a single pause. The world just continues, which sounds like a technical achievement until you're inside it. And you realize how much loading screens break the spell in other games. How they remind you that you're in a game. Here, that reminder never comes. This is where Crimson Desert gets a little philosophically strange. Because most open world games are fundamentally player-centric. Everything orbits around you. Quests can wait, events pause, the world is a museum and you're the only visitor. Crimson Desert seems to be pushing back against that. It wants Pival to feel like a place that existed before you arrived and will keep existing after you leave. That your presence is one story among many, not the only one being told. And this is also what makes it so easy to get lost in. Not the lost in a bad way, lost in the way you get lost in a city you've never been to, where you turn down a street because something caught your eye and an hour later you're somewhere completely different and you're not even sure how you got there. But the journey was the point. Okay, now I have to be upfront about something. When you sit down with Crimson Desert for the first time, you will be overwhelmed. This is not a warning, this is a guarantee. And if you're the kind of person who needs a game to hold your hand through its first hours, this game might make you want to quit before it ever shows you what it actually is. Because the list of things you can do in Pival is, and I want to use this word carefully, staggering. You can hunt bounties, fish, cook meals that have actual mechanical effects on gameplay, build a base, follow the main story, mine resources, craft weapons, trade goods, bank currency, track the economy, run errands for village NPCs, manage livestock. and the immediate instinct is to call this over-design, to say the developers didn't know when to stop, that this is a studio that kept adding features because they could, not because the game needed them. But here's the thing you need to know about Pearl Abyss. They made Black Desert Online, one of the most mechanically complex MMORPGs ever built. A game famous for having so many interlocking systems that entire wiki websites have been dedicated to understanding it. These are not people who accidentally made something complicated. They know exactly what they're doing when they build systems. Because what they're building isn't a traditional action RPG with some side content bolted on. They're building a sandbox, a real one. Not the kind where sandbox means you can choose the order in which you do the main story, but the kind where the game is genuinely indifferent to how you spend your time. Where fishing for 3 hours is not a distraction from the game, it is the game for those 3 hours for that player. And I think the city metaphor is the right one here. Not a museum, a city. Cities aren't curated, they are dense and layered and full of things that interact with each other in ways no single designer ever planned. You can live in a city for years and keep discovering new corners, new combinations, new moments that only existed because 2 or 3 unrelated things overlapped at the exact right time. Crimson Desert is trying to be that. It's trying to create a world so full of interacting systems that the interesting things it produces weren't all written in advance, that some of them will only happen to you. The problem, and this is a real problem, is that most players want to know this going in. They'll open the menu, see 15 different systems they don't understand, and close the game. The gap between what this game is trying to do and how it communicates that intention to new players is genuinely wide. That's a design failure regardless of the vision behind it. But the vision is worth understanding because the vision is unlike anything else being made right now. Here's a question most games never ask you to think about. Why do RPGs use levels? The honest answer is because they work. Levels are a language. They tell you whether you're ready for something. They give you a sense of forward motion even when you're not sure what direction you're going. A level bar filling up feels good in a very reliable, very exploitable way. Crimson Desert doesn't use them, and the absence is immediately, almost uncomfortably obvious. Instead, progression is gear-based. What you can do and how well you survive comes almost entirely from what you're wearing and carrying, not from numbers that tick upward passively as you play. And the implications of that are weirder than they first appear. Here's a specific example of what this actually looks like. You're exploring, you wander into a new region. Looks interesting, seems connected to a rumor you heard in the last town. And then something kills you in about 4 hits. Not because you're the wrong level. There is no wrong level. There is no tooltip that says recommended level 30 or a red skull over the enemy's head. The game just kills you, and you have to figure out why. Maybe your gear isn't right for the enemy type, maybe you need a specific upgrade you haven't found yet, maybe you just need to come back from a different direction with a different approach. The game doesn't tell you. It expects you to be curious enough to figure it out. For some players, this is exactly what they want. The game treats you like an adult. It says the world is dangerous in ways you don't fully understand yet, and it's on you to learn what those ways are. The exploration becomes the progression. The gear becomes the progression, which means the world becomes the progression, which means just being in Pyvel and paying attention is how you get better at the game. For other players, this is genuinely maddening. The absence of a clear numerical feedback loop makes progress feel invisible. You don't know if you're getting stronger, you can't see it in a number, you have to feel it in how fights go, in how much easier the region you struggled with few days ago now feels. And not everyone wants to feel their progress, some people want to see it. Both reactions are valid, but the choice Pearl Abyss made here is a real choice, not a mistake. They decided that the feeling of being in an alive, mysterious world was more important than the dopamine loop of a level bar. Whether that's the right call depends entirely on who you are as a player. Okay, let's pull back for a second and look at everything together. We've talked about movement, we've talked about combat, we've talked about the world and the systems and the progression. And they might feel like separate things, features in a feature list, chapters in a preview article. But here's what I keep coming back to, and I think it's the most important thing about the game. None of these are separate, they are the same idea expressed in different forms. The grappling hook that gets you up a cliff is the same grappling hook that closes distance in combat. The gear that opens up new regions is the same gear that changes how fights feel. The physics that make combat hit differently is the same physics that make the world feel real to move through. This is systems speaking the same language. And when they do, when 2 or 3 of them overlap in a moment you didn't plan and the game does something you've never seen before and will never see exactly again, Crimson Desert achieves something that most open world games are not even trying to achieve. It creates genuine surprise. Not scripted surprise, not a cutscene twist, the kind of surprise that comes from a simulated world doing something its own systems generated without anyone writing it down first. That is rare. I want to be clear about how rare that actually is. Most games produce moments. Crimson Desert at its best produces situations. And situations are more interesting than moments because they are unpredictable, they're personal, and they belong entirely to you. That's what happens when a world is built as a city instead of a museum. But here's the part that nobody talks about, and I want to be direct here because I think some videos about this game dance around it and the dancing doesn't do anyone any favors. The story is bad. Not bad in a lovable B-movie, so bad it's charming way. Just thin. The narrative follows Cliff, a mercenary whose group gets scattered, and he has to find the survivors while uncovering a large conspiracy. That setup works, but it never becomes anything more than a setup. The characters don't grow into people you genuinely care about. The big lore is there, buried in readable notes and environmental storytelling for players willing to dig, but most players will never find it. And the CEO of Pearl Abyss has publicly admitted that the team deliberately prioritized gameplay over the script. You can feel that decision in every cutscene. Critics called the narrative almost non-existent. One described it as a background noise. The actor who played Cliff acknowledged publicly and plainly that the game has story problems. This isn't a minor complaint, and here's why it matters beyond just story is important. Story is the glue that makes players willing to push through complexity. When you hit your 15th confusing system and you're not sure you have the energy to learn it, story is what makes you stay. The emotional investment in characters and world is what keeps you in the game long enough for the systems to open up and become rewarding. Without that anchor, the density of Crimson Desert doesn't feel expansive, it feels exhausting, and for a lot of players that's exactly where it lost them. A score of 78 is not a tragedy, but for a game that was in development for 7 years, that sold 5 million copies on the strength of its promise, a 78 tells you there's a real gap between what this game aspired to be and what it shipped as. That gap is real, and acknowledging it isn't pessimism, it's honesty. Here's the thing though, over-designed and wrong are not the same word. A game can be ahead of its own ability to communicate what it is. A game can have the bones of something genuinely new and also ship with a UI that works against it, a story that doesn't support it, a friction in places that should be smooth. But all of those are patchable problems, and Pearl Abyss is already patching, already responding to the usability complaints, already closing the gap between the vision and the experience. The bones of this game don't need patching, they are already something. But what is Crimson Desert? It's not the best RPG of 2026, it's not the cleanest open world game. Its story is thin in ways that hurt it. Its controls are confusing in ways that push players away before the game can earn them back. Its systems can overwhelm you for hours before they start to reward you. But it's the only game right now that is trying to build a world instead of a museum. The only game where movement and combat and exploration are the same idea wearing different clothes. The only game where the interesting moment you just had wasn't written by anyone. It was generated by a set of systems that were given enough trust to produce something new. That is the hardest thing to build in game design. Not the biggest world, not the prettiest graphics, not the most advanced physics. The hardest thing is a world that surprises you with itself. A world that generates situations you'll want to tell people about. Not because they were scripted, but because the world was alive enough to make them happen. Crimson Desert doesn't always get there, but it gets there more than anything else I've played in a long time. And when it does, when you grapple to the top of a ruin, glide off the edge into a valley filled with fog, land in the middle of something already happening, and pull out your sword because the world didn't wait for you to be ready, in that moment there is no gap between the game and the experience. There is no gap between what is promised and what is delivered. There is just a world and you and whatever comes next. That's what Crimson Desert is doing, and right now nothing else is doing it.